Hi, I'm Theresa Arriola. I'm an assistant professor at Concordia University in Montreal, but I'm currently based on Saipan. I'm also the chair of our Commonwealth 670, which is a community advocacy group that works to produce research, education, and awareness about militarization in the Marianas Archipelago.
Hi, I'm Monaeka Flores. I am a core organizer with Prutehi Litekyan Ritidian, and Prutehi Litekyan joined on with our Commonwealth 670 to, help promote the comments campaign for, the recent comment period for the tactical multi-mission over-the-horizon radar transmitter facility on Babel Island.
I'm Caroline Ferguson, Irlanda. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Maine. I've been working in Palau for the past 6 years with community organizations focused on food sovereignty and decolonization. And I'm also the co-founder of the Allies for Micronesia Project with Autumn.
Yes, I'm Autumn Bordner. I'm, as Caroline said, the co-founder of the Allies for Micronesia Project, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that's focused on basically addressing the unique justice challenges in the US-affiliated Pacific Islands. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne.
As of a couple of years ago, the United States identified 5 sites in Palau for military development: Kyangal, Peleliu, Angar, Narard, and Toby Islands. The stages of development are different and are progressing in more or less legal ways. The most recent campaign, as Monaeka mentioned, has been the public comment period on the environmental impact statement for the Narard facility. But there's also been a lot of work ongoing in Angar Island to try to catch up to the environmental impact statement that was not widely publicized and that people didn't have an opportunity to engage with and comment on, but that was permitted anyway.
Yeah, maybe I could jump. I could just jump in a little bit, which is to say, basically the reason that the US is able to designate military facilities on Palau is because of their relationship with Palau under the Compact of Free Association. Palau was formerly part of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, which was a US colony, and attained independence in the 1990s. Although basically through the Compact of Free Association, which is a treaty, yes, that establishes Palau as an independent nation freely associated with the United States, and that does basically abrogate Palau's sovereignty to a degree by allowing the US to have access to Palau's land, water, and airspace for security and defense reasons. And sort of the flip side of that is that the United States is responsible for Palau's defense and security. So under the compact, the US is allowed to designate sites, like request them from Palau. Palau's government and Palau's government can either say, yes, we'll give you the site, or no, we'll suggest a reasonable alternative site. Although I think basically if there's no reasonable alternative, then the US can just proceed. But that privilege that the US has to designate these sites is not sort of like a blank check. The US does have to comply with Palau's environmental laws and standards. And in fact, basically, what is stated in the compact is a little bit complicated, basically saying the US has to comply with standards that are substantively similar to its own environmental laws, and there has to be discussion around this before like the projects are implemented. But with regard to these specific sites, the US and the Palau entered into a diplomatic agreement basically stating that the US will comply with Palau's environmental laws with respect to these sites. And then, yeah, basically Palau's environmental laws are in fact substantively similar to the US's environmental laws, except for that they're actually stronger in some ways. You know, it's like all of the requirements you'd be used to for an environmental impact statement in a US jurisdiction, but there are stronger protections for sort of cultural impacts and sort of stronger protections for public consultation and public engagement. And these are both areas that have been really lacking in the United States approach. I mean, as Caroline was saying, there really hasn't been much public engagement at all. There's supposed to be public engagement before the process even starts to sort of inform the process. That did not occur. When, to the extent that impact statements were completed, or actually in Angar, I believe it's an environmental assessment, which is a precursor to an environmental impact statement that is meant to sort of determine whether an environmental impact statement is necessary. These documents were not adequately circulated. They weren't produced in Palauan language. They were only available in English. And yeah, the cultural considerations were sort of like shamefully insufficient. I think, for example, in the Nerard environmental impact statement, it was like 1 page of analysis, or not even analysis, basically conclusory statements saying that there is no cultural impact. But Palau's laws are very specific on this, saying sort of that, you know, you have to conduct consultations, then you have to have a detailed sort of list of the issues that were raised and the responses to those issues, which was just totally missing. I mean, there are a lot of other sort of deficiencies with the United States process, but I'll just stop there for now.
All right, thank you. And Caroline and anyone else who might be doing work with some indigenous Palauans, what are you hearing on the ground? Yeah, can you tell us a bit about, you know, the specific concerns or kind of just sentiments that you're hearing?
Yeah, definitely. So along with Palauan colleagues and students, we conducted 16 interviews in Angar and Peleliu states with local community members about how militarization is impacting their lives. And some of the most significant themes that we heard were, first, this lack of information, that people don't know what's going on. They don't know how it's going to impact their environment or their culture or their families, their own safety. And secondly, that there's this real fear that militarization is making Palau a target of war. And people very often point to KUAM as an example of what they don't want to see happen. People also fear that the military is already showing a disregard for local lives. So they talk about, for example, on Angar, closing the roads without notice and not allowing anyone to drive around. On Peleliu, they talk about how loud the airplanes are in the middle of the school day and how distracting that is for students. And these are just the very preliminary stages of development. People are really worried about what's to come next. We also heard kind of two sentiments about this. So some people feel really helpless and hopeless to stand up to the US military. As Autumn mentioned, because of the Compact of Free Association, the US does have some rights, right to claim Palauan lands for the purpose of military use. But other people feel really strongly that Palau is a sovereign nation, it's an independent nation, that the US's responsibility is to protect Palau, and that militarization needs to be seen in this light.
And Monaeka and Isa, are you able to share, because I know the comment period is over for the was over in November, but are there kind of ongoing you know, actions? And yeah, why did you all decide that it was important to get involved in it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we, of course, you know, as Caroline was just mentioning, there's this automatic connection right here with the EIS process where, you know, they both reached out to us to say, heads up, this is the process that's happening in Palau right now. You've kind of been through this before. What can we do, right? So we immediately kind of got to action because of the experience that we do have with previous EISs and a lot of the really real deficiencies that we've also experienced in going over these, you know, these very long technical documents. In this case, it was rather surprising because it was quite the opposite. It was extremely short, and we were finding that in our comments that there really was this EIS in particular was failing to analyze environmental impacts properly. There was no baseline data that they were really citing. So these were a lot of like similar comments that we were all kind of coming to similar conclusions when we felt like something needed to be done. So this is kind of where we came into the picture, right? Because we're also in our community seeing a lot of the responses that Caroline just mentioned, right? Which is there's a sense of hopelessness. How do we get involved? Right. We don't want to be a target. There's a lot of the same sentiment. So what we did was we teamed up with PLSR and we created a toolkit, right, for the community to actively engage in this comment period, a template, a little bit about the various projects that were going on at the same time, right? This is not an isolated project. It's also not isolated in Palau. It's not isolated in the broader Pacific. And so we outlined a little bit of those projects that were concurrently happening so that people could get a better sense of the context, right? And then people were able to send in their letters, and quite a few people were able to send in their comments, and some were in Palau and some were in English, right? And so it was a really kind of important moment that we saw to bring together the voices from Palau and in the Marianas, and to highlight the connection, the militarized connection that we're seeing over and over again in our daily lives.
Yeah, thank you, Isa. I think Isa said it best, and Caroline as well. Like we in Guam, unfortunately, have learned a lot of hard lessons from the process of going through an EIS statement and a comment period, and then watching, these horrible things unfolding, this clearing of land, this massive grading and development taking place. We've learned a lot of the hard lessons. We've seen ancestral burials desecrated. We've seen the destruction, the guaranteed destruction of endangered species and cultural resources. And so, for us here at home, witnessing this in real time, we felt the need to, come to support Palau. We have a direct interest in ensuring that federal actions and decisions do not harm or have the potential to harm cultural resources, environmental resources, and historic properties, not only in Guam, but in the larger Micronesian region as well. And this interest extends to environmental resources that could constitute as cultural and historic properties, including sources of water, bodies of water, plants, animals, forests, but also the lives of the indigenous Micronesian Pacific Islanders, who we share this region with. And it is so important to mention, I mean, even the leaders in Palau, rising up against the presence of missiles and a missile defense system, citing that it will make them a bigger target for war, and also saying that permanent basing of purely military weapons in the Republic of Palau is not consistent with their history as an independent country, not consistent with any threats to their sovereignty and security. And so we have to hear the voices of the people of Palau. We have to stand in solidarity with them, and we have to let the world know that we also, while we're fighting this horrible destruction in our own home islands, we also stand against destruction in Palau and in other parts of Micronesia.
And so what's possible now? What would you like to see? What's the resolution here?
I think that's something that each Palauan community has to determine, and not all communities are aligned with each other or within the community. Another thing that we heard on both Angar and Peleliu is that the benefits, the financial benefits in particular, are very concentrated with a few families. And unfortunately, those families, because it's their land, they are able to some extent, right, to make agreements about how that land will be used. I think our goal right now is just to provide information and to demand a transparent process that Palauans are able to engage in a meaningful way to meaningfully shape what militarization will look like, if it will occur at all in their communities.
I mean, Isa, this is something we saw play out here in the NMI just recently, right, with Pagan. And so is that kind of like the similar kind of action we want here, to have a revised EIS, a second round of process? It's been done before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I think even more importantly, right, is like we are trying to create these bridges that are revealing again the consistencies that we're seeing across the board, and those solidarities and those consistencies that we're seeing allow us to really question, you know, where is the money going? Is this appropriate for the long-term future, right? We've seen it in other places. What can we do so we can build off of that record, right? We're building this record and this archive, this movement that's been ongoing for a very long time. And so I think even that in and of itself is like one of the goals, right? In getting together and having this conversation, and that's part of boosting and building up Indigenous solidarity, sorry, and sovereignty. Like we're actually exercising our sovereignty and asking these questions and being a part of and leading these conversations rather than just being told. Right. And just having to kind of react to these processes. So yeah, I mean, definitely there's also that outcome that the EIS could be changed, right? I mean, in this case, I would surely hope so, given the deficiencies of this particular one. So yeah, it's twofold, I think, in that sense.
And if I could just add on to that, we have to look at the history of this coercive agreement. These are not agreements that people imagine. This is a forced relationship of dependency and loyalty between the United States and the islands in Micronesia that we've seen happen since World War II. It's to ensure colonization and military occupation of the Pacific. And so we really do need to look at the intersections, look at the shared histories, and look at the colonial mechanisms in which what's happening today is made possible. And so that's also really critical in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Monaeka, I'm so glad you pointed that out. Some interviews that we're doing in the new year are oral history interviews with folks who fought for a nuclear-free constitution in Palau. And I think a lot of people, even Palauans, don't know the history of how independence was won in Palau, but the US issued referendum after referendum after referendum to try to force the Palauans to have a constitution that would allow nuclear waste and nuclear weapons in their territories. And so even the agreement to become independent was, in some sense, at least it was attempted to be coerced, right? When you're negotiating for your sovereignty, that's really different than an agreement you might make as a country under different terms.
All right, that's all the questions I had. Anyone else would like to add anything I didn't ask about or reiterate any points?
I feel I've talked a little bit too much, but I do just want to say that the work that Isa and Monaeka have done has been really impactful. The US military was stunned at the response to their environmental impact statement in Narard. Because of their support, it was a really different picture than what happened in Angar. And I'm just so glad that we have their support and their experience moving forward with this. And Autumn's.
Yes, I'll second that. No. I did just want to add also one thing, I guess, is that when we're talking about the EIS process, I think just to reiterate, I was sort of touching on this before, but to be clear, it's not a US EIS process, it's a Palauan EIS process. And I think the US thought, just based on their EIS, when they were like how deficient it was, basically they thought, these people don't know about this. Like, we're just gonna do the bare minimum, push it through. Like, no one will know what's happening. And that's why they were so stunned that there was such a strong response. Which I think is just, I mean, that shows you a lot about, they may profess to sort of respect Palau's sovereignty or have sort of a a respectful relationship, but in reality, they're just trying to push through whatever they want. But in any case, coming back to my main point, this is not like just complying with the US environmental impact statement requirements is not enough here. The requirements are stronger. Palau has also adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and endorsed the norm of free, prior, and informed consent, which means that this project basically should not be allowed to go forward unless Palauans who are impacted have the opportunity to receive information about it, make a decision about whether or not they want the project to go forward, and if only if they give their consent free of coercion can the project go forward. So that's also just something that has been sort of fundamentally violated in this process. I mean, in a lot of these instances, the process itself began long before there was any public consultation, let alone an attempt to seek consent. So just wanted to add that to